All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the book club. As you probably have noticed, Manuel is not here yet, but he is on his way. And so I will do my best to host this until he gets here. That's the plan. So I know we're at chapter 73, and we usually start out with a little bit of intention setting. My intention is to be the temporary head, as for the first time ever in the book club have noted here. And again, my we'll say larger intention is to sort of make sure that people are sort of not missing, we'll say, some of the more important patterns in the diagrams in particular as we go through the text. So I think that, again, because these are later chapters, a lot of this stuff is, in some ways, it's not new, right? What's happening is we're just tying together the same lower patterns and upper patterns with basically larger patterns. It's using the symbolism in a different layer of analysis. You're not going to see a lot of new diagrams, right? It's the same old diagrams with new labels, right? And therefore new implications, right? Because as you change the labels, it changes the meaning, because labels are content, right? And there's a context that's being given as well, obviously. And so that's going to continue to alter the meaning. And I think to some extent that's why, especially in these last few chapters here, we should be able to go a little bit quicker, because a lot of this stuff is review, right? And that's referred to explicitly in these chapters. Like, there's a lot of past referencing. So hopefully I will be able to guide us through this. And when Manuel gets here, he can fix it all, because I'm not good at hosting. Castle, would you like to give us your intent?
I will. So I have my thing here as the encroaching time cycle, which is the chapters are always topical for just the circumstances of the book club. I mean, the fact is that our host is missing, and you have this sort of thing where we've reached the end, in a sense, or we've been kind of cast to the edge a little bit. There's a lot of the stuff of trying to make up for a lack of stability and everything, which hopefully Christopher will kind of bring us back around to, because I'm focusing on the waves that are swirling around while he's kind of holding the line in the center there. Uh, but I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff in this one. I think, to your point, like, I think we've seen a lot of these patterns before, but there's a lot of these things where now we don't have to like try as hard to figure out the patterns. Like, you can almost see certain things and then just point to like 5 different like biblical stories, and then also what happened to you this week, and then like there's no need to try to overly abstractify these things. I'm excited. Like, there's very much a ramping up, and then like when we eventually kind of launch from finishing this book club one day, I think that we're, like, there's a very nice sort of transition between these things and whatever's going to come next. So I'm excited. Christopher, will you please?
Yeah, I am recycling my stated intention from last week. So, as as Mark said, we're looking at the same patterns over and over again. We're still talking about Cain and his descendants at the beginning here. So, yeah, looking at this is Genesis and the start of civilization, and it's started. It's been going, and we should continue to support it. And how else we can do that? And well, I see you've joined us.
Well, physically, still entering the building. I've been doing the labors. It's interesting. Like, I read a lot ahead over the last week, because I don't know. I guess I was curious, which is a good sign. Let's see if I can add. But I'm catching up, because I'm coming from the outside, from the hands in the dirt, and I will be gathering myself and bumping in. I'm getting my PDF up here. There we go. So now we know where we were. Whew, sex with the exotic and the familiar woman. That's something to come home to. Yeah, so I kind of missed what you guys said. But do we want to like rehash some stuff, or do we want to keep
No,
going?
we just did intent setting. So if you want to do that, and then we can do the rehash and then jump into the chapter. That'd be great, because I can't find my PDF somewhere on the computer.
It's on the Discord as well. Yeah, so I've been, I guess we can say it's like a dichotomy, or the two aspects. Maybe that's a better word. I've been seeing them in more and more domains, and I've been seeing how they sin against the same problem, I guess, right? They deviate in different directions. I had a Twitter post where I was like talking about the flesh, and the flesh is that which hosts the spirit, right? Which hosts life, and then the bones are the space which the flesh inhabits. So there's well, that was the associations I had with the exotic woman, right? Like, so she's the flesh and the familiar woman. She's respecting the space, right? The bones. And to have a full-grown, complete human being, we need to both have the flesh and the bones, make a body, right? So my intention is, I guess I want to bring my experience into the book club. Let's see if I can do that. Sounds good. Whew. Do I want to put someone on the spot? So I've been talking a lot about Cain and Abel and the lineages and what they're trying to do, and this idea of the Nephilim that's going to come up, right? But my notes in my book are really sparse, so I guess I want to open the floor for you guys to comment on what you got out of it. So for me, the pointless change stood out. Like Matthieu has been talking about points, right? And basically, the point is what things revolve around, right? Get to the point. Make your point, right? Like, what's the point of this, right? And we've been talking about points that are hidden, right? And points that are known. And pointless, right, would mean that it's not turning around something, right? Like, it would be entropy manifesting, right? So yeah.
Something
So
that I've oh, go ahead.
Well, the other thing that I wanted to talk about is Cain's perspective, right? So there's his perspective, there's God's perspective, right? There's the hypothetical Abel perspective, right? And they're all important, right? They give us different insights. So I think that's maybe a thing to keep in mind.
I've been this thing with the time cycle and the fact of like, you know, these things echoing, not necessarily repeating exactly, but there's a lot of rhyme that kind of happens. Something that I've been noticing a lot as we look through, you have almost like you have the parallel lines of the descendants of Cain and then the descendants of Seth, and how you have this very interesting thing that that Christopher brought up a couple of weeks ago about Lamech. There's two guys named Lamech, and you've got Lamech, the who is the son of Methuselah, and then the father of these two guys that we're going to be talking about today, or four children technically. We probably won't talk about the daughter much, but the you have them, and then you have Lamech, the father of Noah, and something that I thought was interesting is that Methuselah here on this page is the father of Lamech, but then Methuselah is the father of Lamech, the father of Noah, and so there's a lot of really interesting things with the connection between the name Lamech means simultaneously strong man, but also something like to humiliate or to be humiliated or humbled. And that kind of applies simultaneously to both of these characters with that name. But then you've got, what is it? Methuselah is means something like the one who sends or the one who was sent, something like that. So you have this thing of like him kind of introducing Noah, who's this guy that's going to kind of ride the time cycle out, versus Methuselah, which is something like one who was requested or something like that. So you have there's a very interesting sort of thing between like one who was sending something out and then one that like something was expected of him, something of that sort. I don't necessarily have an answer to that, but I thought that those parallels were very interesting, that the spelling and the roots of these names are very close. And then also, I think, I don't want to jump ahead too much, but because of the connection between the names of Lamech's sons and the Jubilee, which we're going to explore a bit more later, like those, there's very much like an echoing or rhyming of those patterns between the two lineages.
Yeah. So the way I would cast what you were saying is like the one is going up, right? Like the one who was requested or something, right? Like, and the one who was sent is going down, right? So there's a directionality, a movement, right, and an opposition in the means of movement, right?
I like that. Yeah, it's like an upward spiral and a downward spiral, like on either. And we've seen that movement as well in a lot of the older diagrams with like the one arrow going up and the other one coming down. But now we're getting it where they're kind of they're also spiraling up that, which I think we're going to see some of that in the coming chapters as well.
Yeah, and so we're talking about lineages, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's 7, right? So there's 7 lineages one way and 7 the other way. So that's like, go ahead.
Well, the Lamech here with the 2 wives is the 7th if you count Adam, and the other Lamech is starting from Seth's son as the first one. But so there is a 7. It's not a perfect parallel 7, but they're both there, and it still works, I think. So
Yeah, it's too much to speak from without delving
right.
into much more. But yeah, I think that's kind of what the 7 generations are representing, right? The 7 generations are, if you take a path in that way, you'll get there, right? And if you take a path the other way, you'll get somewhere else. Yeah, since I don't have much notes, I think we can just move to the pictures. So it's interesting that in these pictures, the women, they are bound to their husband, I guess, right? And they're assigned the profession of the husband.
Yeah, the women are each wife is like producing a son in the opposite diagram here. So
And those are the sons?
The dual
Tubal
those are the
Cain
sons.
and Jubal
Okay.
are the sons of the different women. So
But there is a dual identification with, we'll say, your usefulness in the world, right? Like what are you manifesting in the world? You're manifesting flute, right? You're manifesting tool maker, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I think that is actually pretty significant. Is what are the fruits of the recreation and what are the fruits of the reproduction, right? Because they're those tasks, those manifestations of flute and tool are manifestations of reproduction and recreation, not they're not arbitrary, right? In other words, there's a connection between how they were born and what they were born from and what they do, but then they are identified also with what they do, right? And a lot of people don't sort of understand this, but most last names are professions. That's what they are. So my last name means Smith. So we were blacksmiths. That's what we were. Whether or not that's a good system for naming, different discussion, and it's not the only system for naming, but it is a very common system for naming. A lot of people just don't know where their last name comes from. Ultimately, we'll say, or most recently from medieval times, which is the best as sort of closest indicator in the language, in your native language to how your name looks today, basically. So you can trace it back pretty easily. If you wanted to go back to Roman times, you'd have many more problems that are, some of which are insurmountable. But yeah, there is that element of the union plus the what do you want to call it, the mediating factor, right? One is time, one is space, right? One is order, one is disorder, right? And then it's sort of the flip, if you want to use that term, which I think is fine here. From flute is not a disordered thing, right? Whereas tools, you can use them for a lot of destruction, and so you're making order from from the lower thing to make the tool, right? Which is what's called out rather explicitly here.
Something that that is kind of coming to mind for me is we don't really see J-ball in this diagram, but you have the thing of Tubal Cain is after the name of Cain, and he's essentially kind of like the he's the new version of Cain in a sense. Like Cain was the one that was building the first civilization. This guy is particularly good at making brass and bronze tools. And then you have J-Ball, who's the one that is the father. It doesn't even say that he was one who lived in tents and had cattle. He was the father of those who lived in tents and had cattle. And then Jubal was the father of those who play the harp and pipe. Not, it may be that he also did that himself, but it finds it important to say that he's the father of them. Whereas we're not seeing a lineage, which we're going to get to, I guess, of Tubal Cain. But also there's kind of the same movement that happened between, you had Cain and Abel, who, the term that Matthieu uses was like the opposite twins or like the polar twins. And then you have Seth as like kind of the recreated Adam. So you also have Tubal Cain as kind of like the recreated Cain, even though Cain is already a specialization. And then you have the other two that are like, offshoots of that aren't necessarily connected. And also that thing of, he has descendants that are essentially doing the job of Abel. So like we talked about this a bit before, that there's something about like now Cain's descendants are kind of like manifesting Abel's identity in a sense, except for his direct recreation in Tubal Cain.
when it's also the emergence of the idea of associating your identity with your work, which I think is especially relevant nowadays, right? And so it's it's not even a calling here. It's sort of the result of the accident of your birth, what you're doing, right? At least as expressed symbolically. And so this is kind of the birth of that idea. I think that's why it says father of, right? Because whether or not he did it is irrelevant because it's not part of his identity, but it's
Right.
part of his offspring's identity. Because this is something that you gotta keep in mind. A lot of people get confused with this because we just have this flat world in time mentality. The world has been changing all along, and we'll say complexifying or something, right? And this is just one aspect of that complexification, is that we're going from a world with, we'll say, just regular straightforward names to a world based on naming via lineage, to a world based on naming based, with your task, right? Whatever thing you're doing, as in this case, again, the accident of your birth or something, right? Where that movement is definitely happening here. And so it's kind of important to note, because the world is not a flat static thing that never changes, and this is part of this, is expressing that change.
Yeah, and in Roman times you also had at least you were known by your achievements as well, right? So that's also like you kind of like gather titles along the path. So that's also a part there. And I want to go back to the 7 generations, right? Like that's a reference back to the 7 days of creation, right? And the Jubilee is in some sense, right, like connecting to the day of rest, like the stepping back aspect, right, and letting things unfold, right, like letting things disentangle, and so I think what they're going through is like a, a new sort of creation, but this time it's on humans, right? Like as a well, I wanted to say species, but as beings, right? Like the human beings disconnected from God create their own sort of creation, right? And then you end up with this Jubilee return to nature thing, which, well, when we look at the bottom, right, like it's the establishment of something, right, and then like it can't be maintained or something, but and then you get this return. But Castle was talking about the spiral, right? Because like you can't really return, right? Like you still have something left of the past that you take with you into the future, right? So in some sense you're still moving, right? Like this is the arc of history is going towards the good or something, right? Like
Yeah, but I think also Jubilee is a way to sort of plan the disintegration and reintegration process, right? It's I guess the closest word I can use is ritualistic in that way, right? To allow for this to happen, because if you don't, this is also relevant to today, then it's going to happen without your control, right? Without any of your input, and that is actually far worse for you and everybody else. So, like, don't do that, please don't do that.
It's like a controlled demolition, or also like, thinking of like Fat Tuesday before Lent type of thing, where it's like, let's use all the fat and all the fried stuff and everything like that and get it, because it's like, well, you're going to have to get rid of the stuff anyway. Like just do it now, and then get ready to reset.
yeah. So I think the idea of having what Mark said, ritualistic, right? But like it's definitely scheduled, right? To have a scheduled moment where you return things to their previous state or whatever, right? The fact that it is scheduled and that you can anticipate it adds something really important, right? Because like now you can work towards it, right? Like you can honor it, right? Like you can have a special occasion on that moment, right? And that's like a structure that informs the way that you live at that point as well. And you could say, right, like when we're talking about a sedentary lifestyle and a nomadic lifestyle, that in the nomadic lifestyle these regular events were given by nature more so than in the sedentary lifestyle, and that you actually need to make space to have those same remembrances in festivals more. And yeah, you can just see that as one who is lived, right, and one who is living.
I think we see a lot of that type of thing play out in recent days. Like it manifests differently, but you can imagine, those things where it's like, oh, we got 4 generations of doctors, and then like, you get an only child, and they want to be an actor or something like that. Like that type of stuff happens all the time, and then it disrupts the stability of the family. Like sometimes they even get like, disowned or whatever because of their, desire to do that. But that's like it can manifest in lots of different ways. Like you might have the actor, or you might have the traveling musician, or you might have a priest, right? And like all of those things can actually evince the same reaction from a family that's very stuck in like, no, you're going to be a dentist because your great great granddaddy was a dentist and everyone has been since him.
Yeah, that is a crisis. So now we get to Lamech. I think we touched on him last week a little bit. So it's interesting, right? So he's connecting man to wounds and youth to bruise, right? So I like wounding is in some sense like a rebellion, right? Just like bruising is, but the bruising is not breaking the skin, right? Like it's not penetrating to the core of the person. So and now I gotta remember, but I think, well, the man is also representative of the previous or current generation, and the youth is representative of the new generation, right? So you could say that the youth wanting to be an actor instead of being a dentist is bruising the pride of the family, right? While yeah, like if the head of the household is doing something against the family, right, like that would be completely more devastating in some sense, right? Because he's in a position of authority, right? So I think if we want to connect the wounding and the bruising to these things.
Something I guess I wanted to add that I just thought was interesting is looking at this chapter until now, like most of the time, Matthieu sticks to Genesis. I mean, sometimes he goes to other biblical texts and stuff like that, but this might actually be one of the only times in the main body of the text, not the footnotes, that he's explicitly just kind of gone off road into tradition. And so, which, if you're going to do it for any chapter, like this is, if you're going to say that you're reaching the end of, like the edge of the time cycle and everything like that, it's like, okay, now we are even looking to the periphery for more information because the text itself wasn't sufficient to supply the extra information.
Yeah, that's for sure. Like I'm still struggling with this. Like that's why I don't have notes. Um,
My perspective changed a lot between like my original reading of the story way back and then like going through it in this chapter this past week. That I guess there's something about like Lamech as strong man that, and you know, it even I think it even said that he was like a great hunter or something like that, and that, you know, I always kind of took it as like, oh, he had like this kind of victorious thing of like, see how I've been avenged. But like, as I'm kind of reading through it again, like it seems very much, especially within the context of like one who is humbled or humiliated. Like, there's something about that he's saying this in like a melancholy almost. That
yeah,
it's like, you know, it isn't just you know, like, oh, I've been avenged because of the offense on me. It's like, no, I have just taken on like an extreme snowball effect of everything that already happened to Cain, and like now I'm gonna have to suffer way more than he did.
yeah. It's like a lamentation, right? It's like
Mm-hmm. A limitation, yeah.
that's exactly. So yeah, Pageau's connecting it to the old man, uh, which would then refer to Cain and Tubal Cain, the young man, and so and then he's talking about that Lamech was blind, right? So you can see that if you're like a couple generations in, right? Like you don't know what's what anymore. Like you don't know where things came from, why they are the way that they are, right? And and so like his son has the fresh look on things, right? Like so he needs to be his guide, and and so yeah, so the young man has no connection to the tradition, right? Because like he needs to be connected through his father, right? His father is blind. So he might be able to guide him through the world, right? But he can't recognize the heritage, right? That's and we see that now, right? We see that the youths in the universities or whatever, right? They're like, oh, look at that, that's bad, right? It's like and then the older generations are listening to them, right? They're actually okay, like let's get rid of these things, right? So I'm looking at it in that sense, right? It's like, okay, the youth is observing something that their father is just like he's just living his life and he's unaware of these things, and then he ends up acting on the instruction of his son, right? um
So something that I was thinking is, you know, so the name Cain has like an association with like a staff or a spear, you know. So you also have like, you know, he has employed his son as like a member of his staff to help him on the hunt, and then also you know, you have this. So he's also like his walking stick in a sense. Like he's being led, you know, maybe even by hand or like his hand on the shoulder or something like that through the place. But then I was getting the same sort of thing of like, you know, you look at kids now where it's like, well, you have an older generation that is relying on much younger people who have a lesser perspective but are more connected to like technology, for example. Like you see, you know, like you have to help grandma out with the fact that she can't navigate her cell phone, you know, so it's like she has to lean on her grandchild in order to kind of get access to the stuff. But also it's like the grandchild doesn't actually know, you know, like the bigger picture of like how to properly navigate this. It just knows how to operate the technology, you know. And then so it's like, well, you are very much you having like the blind leading the blind. Like you have this person doesn't know how to navigate the technology, and then they don't know what the younger person doesn't know, and the younger person doesn't know what they don't know, and there's very little connection to whatever was before this person that they're helping out as well. And I almost imagine this scenario of, you know, like the killing of Cain and Tubal Cain is. I mentioned last week the thing of, you know, one of the things that people said as was like a connection to the mark of Cain was also like a shaking of the limbs. So it's like it's possible to mistakenly identify a human being if they have unusual movement and you're like just encountering them in the forest. But then this thing of like, he slew a man for bruising him, and if that's Tubal Cain, like maybe he noticed too late that it was a human being and then responded violently or something like that, and then it was like double self defense. Just like those horrible scenarios that happen with mistaken identity.
Well, it like the way I see it, right, is like he's acting out against Cain, right, the old man, because he doesn't know better, right, and then he's like, what did I do? like what just happened, right? Like I just destroyed the source of my being, right? Like I just castrated, like I cut myself off from the source. And then, well, what's left? Well, what's left is the youth who misled him, right? And it's like, well, are you going to blame yourself for not recognizing your source, or are you going to blame that which was misleading you, right?
Mm.
And I think the impulsive reaction is blaming that which misleads you, right? Because like there's, from the perspective of being blind, there's no way that you could have not been blind, right? And then when you get rid of your eyes, right, you see you haven't solved the problem, right? And you're like, oh, like what did I just do, right? Like I didn't make the world better by getting rid of that which misled me, because like that wasn't the problem. Like I didn't have wisdom. That was the problem.
And also, it sounds like he got wounded in the process of hunting Cain. So it's like you also do have that where it's like maybe he shot the arrow first or threw the spear or whatever. But then like it could be that Cain put up a fight or something, and at that point you just have this rapid acceleration of it's like, oh, this person did this to me, immediate response. That person did that to me, immediate response, and then it just cycles out of control.
It kind of seems to me that this Lamech here is living through kind of a microcosm of the flood that comes later with Noah.
Yeah, well, he's disconnected from the top, right? And he's disconnected from the bottom because he gets rid of his son, right? So yeah, like then what is left? Like you just completely unmoor, right? So yeah, that is correct. So yeah, he's using the word regression, right? But like I see the word loss, right? So there's when you have the picture there, right? Like it's designating a space, right? And then you lose something through whatever means, right? And then you can't maintain the space anymore, right? And then you get exiled, right? Like you regress to a state of being in which that thing that you had is no more there. And I think it's also in some sense analogous to eating the fruit, right? Like, because there's no way back, right? Like the regression doesn't put you at the same place that you were without having the thing, right? Like the fact that you know of the thing and that it's taken from you is puts you in a completely different place, even though all things are the same.
Yeah, I'm thinking too, like the father of Noah, Lamech, also like died peacefully before the flood even happened, and like within his context, like his father was the one who sends out and everything. So you have like a kind of a successful delivery of of Lamech and then Noah, and then like the mission is complete. Whereas there's kind of sort of like an expectation of Methuselah, I think, was this Lamech's father. And it's like, well, it kind of, there was like a failure to land. type of thing, where it was almost like by having that connection to the future, the father of Noah was able to kind of just like pass away peacefully and avoid just the calamity of the flood entirely in his experience. Whereas to your point, Christopher, like this one, it's almost like by eliminating what's in front of and behind him, like it really is like he just dropped into the water.
Oh, I like that. Like that's good in front and behind. That's better than above and below. It's like, yeah. And I think that is the distinction. Like we kind of touched on that last week, right? Where you have the time which is a path, like a horizontal, right? So there's things in front of you and behind you, and then there's things that are above you and below you, and they're not the same thing. And so being flooded in that sense, right, is also a little bit different, right? Like
you guys ever watch Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, where you get near the end of the movie and he chops the rope bridge, and then you've got what was in front and behind. Both parts of those bridges fall, and then all the guys fall into the river full of alligators. Everything like it's very much that same sort of thing, just traumatized.
Okay. Yeah, I can get into it, right? Like the blood vengeance thing. Like if yeah, I'm just gonna drop it. But I don't like the contrast that he's using there. So he's connecting sight here to the ability to identify phenomena correctly, right? So it's also connected to naming them correctly, right? The identification and the naming is closely related, right? So in some sense, the sight is preceding proper naming. And then he's connecting Cain to a wild animal, right? So animals are lower than humans, right? So he's identifying his ancestor as below him. So that's an important thing. And yeah, since he's connecting it to naming the animals, right? Like you can name that which is below you, right? But you can't name that which precedes you or something, right? Because you originate from it. So like that's like in the lineage line, it's the same sin as misidentifying the serpent or something, right? Like same pattern. Let's just say it that way.
I also noticed on here we're talking. Oh, I was just thinking with the improper naming here. That is something that we can see today. That's very common in society. That's been building over, I think, decades. Has been an increasing problem in the U.S. and maybe the West in general. Is people having an inability or rebelling against the proper naming of things. That's
Yeah, and I think that is related to sight. Like there's a lot wrapped up in sight, right? Like it matters where you're standing, what you can see. If you're on top of the mountain, you can see something different if you're at the bottom of the mountain. Like it's that simple, right? People want to make it complicated. It's not complicated. It's really simple. And your experiences limit what you can see, right? That might be a good thing, even, right? But it also might be a bad thing. And like that's the problem, is that if if you don't understand the significance of the limitations of your sight, like eyes to see, then your ability to name will always go astray pretty quickly. And so the fact that naming can happen doesn't mean you can do it, and the fact that you can do it doesn't mean your names are correct or useful or good, right? And that's not a function of, the improper application of the rules of naming or some other form of legalism. It's a function of your ability to see. And maybe you have no ability to see and therefore no ability to name. That's quite possible. Like, I don't know what to tell you. There have to be some people like that out there, and your ability to see yourself is not great. So it might be you. I don't know, but it's worth considering at least.
There's something interesting there about this kind of like arrogating place as judge to oneself, to be able to just like I have the right of completely naming this thing, and everyone has to acquiesce to whatever I've named this thing or myself or whatever. It's like you get a bunch of if you had a bunch of people encountered like some sort of zoo animal at the zoo, and everyone had like their own name that they wanted to give it, and then they went to war because of that or something ridiculous, but there is this thing of and I made this reference yesterday, the thing of like in the book of Judges when everything is falling apart, and it just says over and over again, in those days, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And it's like they were relying only on their, like, what is the term, the personal private perspective or something like that. Or it's just like, yeah, they were like 100% just reliant on that, not outsourcing any sort of other thing. And then it's like, yeah, of course you're going to do bad, but also like, you're going to screw up from time to time, like a human being. But also, if you're also just going to keep on going and say, well, I see what's in front of me, and then I'm going to rely totally on myself to judge this, and then like I'm right all the time. Reminds me of, is it Psalm 73? The where he says, I was like a beast before thee, but nevertheless you hold me by my right hand, type of thing, where like he says it multiple times, that I think that but that it's this thing where it's like, yeah, I was going to, I screwed up, like, and we're gonna get into this kind of thing in the next chapter, which we might actually reach today. But this thing of like being as a beast, in the face of justice, and then still like, okay, do you have that connection though, or are you just going to stay there? And so you have this thing of like the negative feedback loop happening between Lamech, Cain, and Tubal-Cain injuring each other, and eventually, the middle guy wins. And it's like, well, at no point was there any like, hey, wait a second, I'm human, or it's like, wait a second, sorry, I didn't mean to do that, or anything. It's just like immediate response, I have to do this thing, and then it's just like you wind up destroying yourself. So there's
that is interesting, because now I'm connecting it to an experience I had today, right? So I have here better phrased as a laws of divine justice, right? So that's relating to the plot vengeance thing, right? So there's a way in which you're held up, right? Like things are functioning okay, right? And divine justice is just manifest in your life. And then the stupid thing happens, right? It's always the stupid thing. And then suddenly you harden your heart and divine justice is nowhere to be found. and you're just hurting yourself, right? Like you're just like, okay, like I'm disallowing this to be straightened, and instead I'm like, I have to go down the wrong path, like stubbornly.
It's like, it's a failure to remember.
I want to highlight something too, Castle, that you sort of brought up, which is when you can't agree on naming, right? Another way to say that is when you can't agree on words and what they point to, right? Because that's what naming is, pointing a word to something. You get war. It devolves into war, and so you might use that frame to understand why everyone's talking war. Now they don't mean real war, right? At least not in the beginning. But they are fighting a war. They're fighting a war of language. They're fighting a war of definitions. They're fighting a war of concepts, because that's their highest value. I refer to that as the age of gnosis, right? It's propositions as knowledge, and knowledge is the highest value. And yeah, and then you feel like you're in a war when people are misusing the knowledge as expressed as propositions. Because how else do you, for these people anyway, how else do they convey knowledge? Well, through words. That's all they have. They only have propositions. And so that's why they're making the war talk. That's what the war talk is all about for them. And, fair enough. Like, I get it. Also, you're a lunatic. There's no reason to talk about it that way. And real war people die. Okay. War of words, no one dies. Sorry. It's just it can lead to that, which is why they're not wrong to point at war, but also they're the ones causing it. So maybe they could just not do that. That would be fantastic. So yeah, but that would require submission to an authority on what words mean. And, and like there's the French attempt to do that, which is really bad. There's got to be a healthier way because we used to do it just fine, right? So that's the nuance everyone's missing, is that we don't want to create real war where people are dying through weapons of extreme human destruction through various methods, and a war of words where people are just upset that other people are naming things wrong. But names are important, but like at a certain point, like this is, you gotta have an interim play, right? It can't be, if you don't use my language, we're going to war. Like you could at least jail a few people in the middle, right? And maybe that would calm things down. But if you're not willing to do anything, right? If neither side is willing to do anything, then the pressure just builds up. And what happens is there's these little skirmishes that are unacknowledged, and then there's all kinds of messiness around, well, should we arrest protesters or not? It depends what they're protesting about, depends how they protest, right? Instead of dealing with the problem correctly. And that builds up, and then the only way out becomes war. And that's the danger we're facing now, is that the only way out is going to be war if we keep this up. If we don't have lesser punishment systems, if we don't actually enact justice, which we have and could be perfectly revivified, we're going to end up in a war for sure. I agree. I think it's an easy way to avoid it, and we could just do that instead. That's the only difference.
Yeah, it's you see this thing with like I'm seeing the connection between the Jubilee. Like you allow a certain amount of things, like you're kind of aware of where the boundaries are and what you're allowed to let go. And within the context of justice, you could take this, like, you go too far by finding people and arresting people for every single possible infraction. It's like that. You can encourage revolution in that way by doing that. And you can also allow the entire city to get taken over by gangs, if you don't enforce rules every now and then. And a lot of times, like, a decent balance is just, well, this person is smoking marijuana on their front yard, so I'm not going to arrest them. But also, like, generally when they actually do arrest them, like, it's because they were in the middle of something else, and like you talked about this, where they plead down in court, to the lower thing. But yeah, I guess there's a certain level of forgiveness that's involved, where it's like, okay, we're not going to, or even like you get pulled over by a cop for whatever reason, and it's like maybe they pulled you over for 3 reasons and they only fine you for 2 or something like that. It's just like, well, like they're not going to completely crush you with the law. So, something that I'm not going to really pursue this further, but for the folks at home, you can actually see every single pattern we've talked about in this chapter in Matthew 18. It's like not even a page. If you just go through Matthew 18, between the forgive people 70 times 7, and then also the thing of like the parable of the ungrateful servant, like that page itself, if you just go through that, like all of this is in there.
Interesting. So when you guys were talking about fighting the wars of words, right? You have this phrase, the pen is more powerful than the sword. And it seems like the frame of the sword has been attached to the pen. And like the pen can only be viewed as a sword now, instead of actually as a pen. As something that is, it's not a creative force, it's a destructive force instead.
It's funny because I was thinking about the thing of like you live by the sword, you die by the sword type of thing, and it's like you can also live by the pen and die by the pen within that same context you mentioned.
It will be a fountain of blood pen. Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm reading the end of the chapter, right? And it's basically talking on, and I kind of touched on this, right? It's like, well, you're the problem, right? Like you did the thing, and now you're looking out at the world and you're trying to be vengeful or whatever, right? But like the thing that needs to be justified, well, not justified, be called to justice is you, like not anything outside, right? And so like when we are wrong and we go running around trying to change things in the world because like to fix the wrong in ourselves, that's when havoc happens, right? And I think in some sense this is all right, like a consequence of Cain um, freaking out at having the wrong sacrifice, and instead of pointing back at himself and changing himself, it's just like this spiral
That's
70 times 7.
that's one of those interesting things too of like so you've got the interior microcosm and so like these things can spiral out of control exteriorly, and you get the blood vengeance stuff and it's like but then you can almost kind of like self-contained like do like a controlled detonation inside. I was this point of like pointing back to yourself is something that King David does really well in the Psalms, like literally the one I reference where he's just like he sins and he says I was as a beast before thee, you know and it's like he kind of self-accuses and you can see this in like dealing with people that are frustrated with you where you just if you know that you irritated someone and you just go to them and say look I'm the worst like I screwed up or whatever, oh you're gonna hate me when I tell you this or whatever, like you just kind of put it on the line, like that actually lowers the stress level because you've just self-accused, you've spared them the need for justice by accusing yourself. And then there's also like a submission involved. So it's like, oh, we've just de-escalated, and I just did it like I just bounced it off myself, you know.
Well, you haven't spared the need for justice, but what you've done is you spared the conflict,
Right.
right? Because I've resolved the conflict for you. Yeah, I screwed up. Like it's just done, right?
Yeah.
And then the conflict for them doesn't appear, and what that does is that mitigates the justice, right? Because now they're not trying to enact justice out of the anger as the result of having to do the conflict.
Yeah, it's just rectification. Yeah,
exactly. It just helps you, right, as the transgressor in that case.
Yeah.
And you can flip it around, right? Like, because I actually had that experience today. If you just want to rectify things, and then instead of doing the rectification, the conflict gets brought in, right? It's like, wait, why are we going into the conflict thing? Like, I was not interested in actually engaging in conflict. but yeah, like when people act out of guilt, right? Like they end up wanting to justify themselves. And I heard this great saying this week, right? Like you should never justify yourself because the people that are going to accept your justification are not going to need it. And the people who are going to need your justification are not going to accept it. Like, so yeah, like you just end up playing a game where it's like, well, who's right? It's like, okay, no. So now we've established who's right. Like now we're no step closer to getting things fixed.
Yeah.
Like
it reminds me of there is a story of it was in medieval Europe. There was some guy who he was like an armed robber, and like he had harmed people. I'm not sure if he actually killed anyone, but he definitely did a lot of damage, property damage, stole a lot of goods and everything. And eventually he like started to kind of repent a little bit of what he was doing. Like he was still committing crimes and everything, but something happened where he slipped up and he got caught. And it was as a result of like kind of changing his heart a little bit. Like he kind of lost his edge on crime, and then he gets captured, and like the punishment was death, essentially. Like he was going to get taken to the gallows or whatever. And so they go and they say, this is your list of crimes and everything. And he basically like he confesses and repents and converts like on the spot, and like just he holds nothing back. He self accuses more than they did when they read off all of his crimes. And the people who are judging him, and of course it was also like public event, they actually change their minds on him, and they say, you know what, actually we need more people like you, because nobody takes responsibility. And like you can't live here, but like we'll send you off and everything, and you can just go live a normal life. And he actually told them, no, you have to kill me, because you said I broke all the laws, and if you don't do justice here, like we're good. Like thank you for forgiving me and everything, but also you have to let this run its course, because otherwise you're gonna be too easy on crime, and everyone's gonna just mimic me if you allow this to happen. So like no hard feelings, just kill me. Like we're not gonna it's not gonna be a big deal. I know that I just confessed, so like we're gonna be fine. But yeah, you can't go back on this one. It was a very interesting. It was a very cordial execution that he consented to, and but there's an example there of like, well, there's no one's gonna contest that. Say, oh, this was unjust. Like, no, he allowed it. Like, it's fine.
Yeah, I have a story of that being one step further, with someone being unjustly accused and still taking responsibility through the unjust accusation, because it was basically, it was in the army, right? And like he's like, oh, let's institute rations, and then they rebelled, right? And he's like, okay, like he did it, like and he basically got to be a scapegoat. I don't know if he volunteered for that, but like that was the way that the order was restored. And it's like, well, that's tough, man. Like I don't know how to judge that. Like that's really, I don't even want to think about these things. Um, yeah. So to go back, right? Cain cut off the branch he was standing on, right? And that's often the case, right? And it's like, I guess, like when we're talking about unforgivable sins, right? It's like, okay, so you doomed yourself, right? Like, how do you forgive that, right? Like where do you stand and find forgiveness from that place? So
But that
yeah,
really is
that
it. It's an unwillingness to submit. Like, it's like, well,
yeah, it
like
is,
the
but
forgiveness is waiting for you, but it's like if you never go, like,
well, but you have to believe that there's a source who can forgive you first, like.
yeah. Well, yeah, that's the thing. Is like despair is actually one of the worst things, because it's just like, well, it's a complete retraction into yourself. Like then there's that kind of like going only through your personal private perspective again, where it's just like,
Yeah.
well, I have backed into this, and there's nothing else.
And that's the frame where you're on top, right? Like that's the frame of man, right? And like I've been thinking about the Son of Man, right? It's being used in the New Testament a lot. It's like, well, like what if you run the course of the frame of man? Well, then you're the Son of Man, right? Like you're the inheritant of man manifesting himself on earth, right? Without God. So I was looking here, and it was 7 times 7, and I'm like, that number is really close to 48, but it's obviously 49. So I think Matthieu made a massive mistake with numbering his chapters. Like he could have done the what are they called, the number of files? I don't even know what they're called.
Like numerologists or whatever.
The numerologists, just those crazy people.
But there is something to like, the last digit is kind of implied. Like that's the I don't know. You could
That's a
probably scrape that
jubilee.
one
You
up.
mean the?
Yeah, no. So, in a way, it works.
Yeah. You have
Well,
to
the
add.
Jubilee was actually the 50th year, but
Oh,
so
yeah, fair enough.
Oh yeah, 7 times 7. Okay, that makes sense.
You're
Oh
going to
man,
make me do
that's
math again. But
well. Yeah, now we're squaring things, right? It's like there must be something with that as well when you're squaring things, and then you can put the cherry on top, right? Like that's the 50th. Okay, now we're getting back to our buddy Nebuchadnezzar, episode 5. Cut down the tree, scatter its fruits, let its heart be changed from a man to a beast. So yeah. Does someone want to read it out loud, the text? Because I think it's just nice to have that in our awareness. I'll do it because we have all of these volunteers here. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in my palace and saw a dream which made me afraid. There was a great tree in the center of the earth which grew strong. It reached into heaven and was visible to the ends of the earth. The beast of the field had shadow under it. The birds of heaven dwelt in its branches, and all flesh was fed from it. So I guess we'll stop here. So it's building a bunch of relationships, right? And a relationship of sustenance, right? Different types of sustenance, dwelling inside, finding shadow, and being fed. Behold, a holy one descended from heaven and said, cut down the tree and its branches, shake off its leaf, scatter its fruits, and let the beasts and birds flee from it. But leave the stump and its roots in the earth. Let it be wet with dew of heaven, and let its portion be with the beast of the earth. Let its heart be changed from man to beast, and let 7 times pass over it. Okay, so the leaves are the sources of shadow, right? The fruits are the sources of food, and the birds and the beasts, they no longer can. There's nothing to partake in anymore, in some sense, right? So it's desertification. It's changing life into the desert.
it's very much like it's a setback, but it's not complete annihilation. Like, something we talked about before is like the tree can, within this context, like a tree can still grow back. It just requires a certain amount of time. It still has access to sunlight and water and everything. You've lost a bunch of progress, but you can get back there. Like you're reduced to the potential of what you had before.
Yeah, so you can say that the stump and the roots are like the point, right? And the point is under the heaven, right? So the heavens is still covering it in some sense, and it's providing water, which would be the source of the resurrection of that tree, right?
It's like back to just one step above seed or something like that.
Yeah, and so the regression is let its portion be with the beasts, right? So it's a reduction, I guess, if we're thinking from the human scale to the animalistic or natural scale. I guess that would be in the frame. So yeah, that's interesting that he's scared by that dream, right? But yeah, but Yeah, well, we'll just keep going. So he's connecting it to falling asleep, right? And I think when you say it's like a precede thing, right? Like sleep has the ability to restore to a previous state. Actually, when your computer is put to sleep, right? Like all the programs are still loaded and everything, right? So you can just get back into it, which is different than that you have to grow it from the power on.
Like, and there's an opportunity there too. I mean, it wasn't cut down for no reason, right? Like there was an overextension that was happening, and you hear people, talk about this in business, where they say, oh, we got to go back to grassroots, or whatever. It's like a voluntary consenting to this type of cutting down, so that we can kind of, what's the slogan, the Build Back Better or whatever, you know.
Yeah, you can't manifest creation without destruction, roughly speaking, or manifestation uh, without some form of disruption. And that's what I was talking about earlier. No one wants to disrupt anything, right? Nobody wants to go back. It's like, but you have to. So you may not want to. You may say we can't, but we can and we will. The question is how? Will we go back through a collapse, or will we go back by voluntarily accepting the responsibility for the destruction of or dismantling of whatever it is we have, plus the revivification of it? Because that's really what we need to be talking about now. Is, well, obviously there's something bad here. You can argue we don't know what it is, but if it's continued to spread, we'll have a collapse. So best not do that, right? And that's where nobody wants to take the responsibility, right? They'd rather just say we can't go back. That's just code for we can't change anything to try and make it better. That's all they're saying, right? We can't actually change anything and try and make it better because we can't go back. But in order to move forward, you always have to go backwards in some sense, because you have to have a sense for where you came from to go to a place. And when you don't do that, you go to random places. In all cases, it doesn't matter what your intent is. It's irrelevant to the universe, right? Like reality doesn't understand intent or care about it at all. And so you can intend to make things better, right? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. But it doesn't make any difference if you're not willing to voluntarily sacrifice the things that you think are good. Now you can't get anything better ever. Just ever. It's never going to happen.
There's something with like on occasion, and the few times that I put like a little animation in here, I use that program Fusion 360, and they have a really nice feature that shows you the timeline of everything that you've done. And if you wanted, like, if you screwed something up, like 2/3 of the way through, you can just scroll back in the timeline, and you can start building from there, and it still shows you everything in the failed timeline. And so you can look at it and say, well, I did this little thing right, but everything else I screwed up. So you can go back, build from where it was, and do all these things. There comes a point as you're kind of rebuilding that I've lost this other thing, but you can also look at it. So it's almost like, I can reflect on my sins without reattaching myself to them.
So, like the thing that you said with almost regression to the seed castle, I think it's important, right? So, because like, what is this tree stump doing, right? Like it's saying we're not gonna deny our roots. Like we're not gonna deny where we came from because we came from a right place. Like we might have not made it manifest properly, but where we started from is correct. And I was thinking about like how the covering of the tree might like inhibit other trees to grow, right? Like when we're looking at this the hierarchical tree, right? Like that means that there's no other trees in the hierarchy unless they're assigned by the main tree at least, right? So um, it's different to grow a new tree than to regrow the tree that's already there. right? Because you know that the tree that's already there has the right components, right? And the new tree, you don't know. So I was actually yesterday I was talking about the head, right? And replacing the head, and like the head is like the source of the identity, right? So if you have to go to the new king or whatever, right? Like that's some risky business because you don't know if the head is gonna adhere to the same principles as the previous heads, right? But like if the hand of the king dies, right? Like that's pretty bad, right? But like he can be replaced, right? And like yeah, sometimes the hand of the king dies and then the kingdom dies. Like those situations also happen, right? But it's a less vital component, right? Because the identity of the kingdom rests in the king, right? And like if the head is cut off, right? Like now is the same body going to allow to be continued to manifest, or is there going to be a new body as a consequence of having a new king? And I think that's kind of like um say they're saying here, right? Like yeah, we're not letting go that which we have, right? Like the things that we have that are established, they need to be maintained.
Mm. Yeah, there's a lot of it's like an extreme pruning almost, where it's like, well, you prune the branches, but then also it's just like, okay, we got to completely come back. The the thing that was coming to mind for me was, you have the thing with Moses where God offers to just get rid of the Israelites and just make a new nation of him. It's like, well, it's still a nation for Jacob, right? So like we can come back to this point and then we can kind of branch out from there. And then you have the whole aspect of eventually it winds up happening that you do have to cut off that entire generation except for like Joshua and like one or two other guys, and then it's just the younger generation that's entering into the promised land. But you
Mm.
still, so there's an interesting thing where it's like, okay, we're going to cut all these people off and then start over, and it's like, no, we stick with this one, and then there's sort of like an also getting cut off yourself, not necessarily as a result, but there is something, if he didn't have all those people egging him on, he might not have sinned in the way that he did. That resulted in him being cut off.
And why couldn't they go in? Because they didn't have faith, right?
Right.
Like they couldn't believe. like,
Yeah.
like they just couldn't get themselves to a place that they could get in, right? And that's why they needed to be cut off, right? Like
Yeah.
because sometimes you can't things cannot change, right? And then like you have to start somewhere new.
Yeah. And the thing also about like the faith aspect of like looking at it as fidelity, where it's like, well, it's a connection to the thing that also preceded you as well. So it's just like they can't go forward because they're also not connected to the thing that was before them. So it's also kind of the same Lamech move, falling into the water type of thing.
Yeah. So I just want to say like, okay, so the tree is identified with a person, and I'm with the king, right? So we can see the eye, right? Like so we can understand it that way. Um, so what also stood out to me is that then perhaps your tranquility will endure, right? So it's like, dude, the path that you're on, no, like bad. There's this other path which is good, but also I don't know if it's your path, bro. So yeah, like I think people think that when they repent or something that things get better, right? Like this, it's like, well, even if you do, like, yeah, it might not be for you.
And that's part of the repentance too, is you don't there's always the possibility that maybe like justice still overtakes you. You know, like you have, that's also where the submission kind of comes in, where it's like, well, you might still have to suffer the consequences of your actions. Maybe not. Like there's also the chance that you won't, but it's not up to you. Like that's also the thing of like the supernatural help aspect, where it's just like, well, I'm a cat that needs veterinary services, and like maybe it'll work out, maybe it won't. But it's just like, well, you never know. Like what other option is there?
Yeah, and I like the falling asleep that he's putting it into, right? Because like when we fall asleep, it's like stuff happens. Sometimes we wake up in terrors. Sometimes people don't wake up at
Right.
all. So yeah, like a lot of things can happen when you fall asleep.
But that's also the thing too, is that if like without submitting to that possibility, like the negative consequences are essentially guaranteed. Where it's just like, well, do you want the chance of a positive outcome, or do you want a guarantee of only negative outcomes? But the negative outcome is always like conditional in a sense.
Yeah, and it's that level of asymmetry that people are for some reason really uncomfortable with. Right? They want a certain positive outcome guarantee. That maybe a document, something you can sign, an enforcement policy. I think that's not how it's going to work. Yeah, you're right, Castle. The way to think about it is you're giving up a guaranteed negative outcome for potentially no better outcome with the chance of a more positive or totally positive outcome. And people don't like to think about the world that way because we're stuck in this binary and this equality mode, and they're not considering that nothing in the world works like that, and therefore you just need to adjust how you're thinking about the world, right?
So yeah, so at the end it says forcing him to mingle with the poorest of the poor, right? So that's a fall from grace, like quite literally. Your grace is Mr. Peasant now. But there's this loosening by sleep, right? Because that's effectively what sleep does, right? Like it allows for other things to get a voice or whatever, get their say, and that makes way for the foreign perspective, right? So we need the sleep to break out of the ossified attitude that Mark was talking about, right? Where we're like trying to have answers. And yeah, you guys were talking about the positive and the negative outcome, right? Like I want to add miracle. So miracles can also happen, but like that loosening needs to occur for the miracle, right? So there's things that are beyond our eyes, right? And like we were talking about with the with the blood vengeance attitude, like we're not going to make place for these things, right? Like we're going to cut them off before they can take root. They can establish themselves and become like real, right? Like instead of just a seed, a promise, a hope. Um, so, and on the next page, it starts talking about righteousness, right? Uh, so our sins are, in some sense, they're bending off, right? Like they when you take up the plow, don't look back, right? It's the straight line, and then when we look back, we waver, right? Like we lose the path, right? Like we sin, right? And so when he's talking about raking off your sins by righteousness, right? So righteousness would be the means of restoring or recovering the sins, right? So that would be like a rectification, right? Like it would be a straightening, right? Like it would be setting bones, like quite
Mhm.
literally. And yeah, so mercy is to deal with the iniquities, right? So yeah, with the lacking, right? With the insufficiencies, right? Because like why do you have poor? Well, because like you're not providing as a whole, right? Like there's just people that are going to lack things, and the antidote to that, or the way to heal that is by extending mercy, right? So like a mercy is something that goes outside, right? And like comes back in at the bottom, right? So it's taking an excess resource, right? And it's injecting that excess resource without it being systematized, right? Like it's well, an act of mercy, right? So
Mhm. And he doesn't call for entire governmental reform. Like in this next paragraph where he says, it is here. Daniel did not advise Nebuchadnezzar to eradicate homelessness from his kingdom or assimilate them or even to give them jobs. But he's not saying, okay, the Babylonian government needs to respond in this way. It's like, no, you, Nebuchadnezzar, on the personal scale, need to start behaving this way. And also, I mean, the fact that he's at the top of the hierarchy, like, people are going to follow what he's doing. He doesn't have to write this into law or anything like that. There's lots of large scale changes happen just by people observing leaders.
yeah,
Yeah, I
but
think
also the
that's what
other
we've
side of that,
lost,
yeah,
right?
it's definitely what we lost.
Yeah, because everyone's in the judgment mode, and people aren't even seeing, like, my Twitter interactions this week. I'm like, did you understand what you just typed? Because you kind of proved my point while trying to refute me. And people don't even, they're not at the level of awareness of what they're acting out, and also that they are in judgment mode when they don't have a position to judge from, and that they don't know the difference between having a position to judge from and not. Like, they don't see actions as being things that that are deterministic, right? They're looking at credentialism, or legalism, or other methods of determining whether or not someone's worth listening to on a topic or whatever, rather than accomplishment, right? Rather than manifestation, rather than participation, all the important things. And I think that's part of the issue, is we're very much sort of living in that time when uh, everyone's judging everyone else and never themselves, right? But also they're not aware of what criteria to use to judge, and so they're basically using what amounts to random criteria. And when you have the fall of, we'll say, trust in institutions, credentialism doesn't work as a method of conveyance of authority anymore, or expertise, which might be different things. And now you have two problems, right? You don't have one problem, you have two problems. And that just that fact alone, people aren't accounting for. And when you can't sit there and sort of figure out, oh, why is this important? What is important about this? Why does this matter correctly? You just end up making bad judgments left, right, and center. And everybody goes, I don't know why we can't all get along. That's because everybody's making judgments and no one's making good judgments. And if people who are able to judge are making good judgments, you're not recognizing it. And that's a much bigger set of problems. And it's a set of problems, not a problem. Right? There's not a solution to that. That's a lot of problems. And that's what chaos looks like.
Yeah, so I wanted to point out this idea about fixing the system, right? It's like, well, maybe the system isn't wrong, right? The fact that the system doesn't produce the desired outcome doesn't make the system wrong. So you can say, well, like you can fix it by fixing the head, right? But Jesus said the poor will always be with us, right? So like even if you fix the head, that doesn't mean that things will be perfected, right? Like there's just realities, right? And we need to cope with them, right? Because we can't resolve them. And that means that you, well, you have to use band-aids sometimes, I guess.
Well, one thing about the poor always being with you thing, I mean, this is something I think, gosh, what's the name of that economist? I forgot his name that everybody loves. There's this thing of like,
Thomas
Someone
Sowell,
loves economists. What the?
what would you say, Christopher?
Yeah, Soul.
Was
Yeah,
it
Thomas
Thomas
Sowell.
Sowell?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, great guy. He talks about, the people who are the poor are a lot of times they actually don't stay there. I mean, there's some people who it's like they are 100% stuck, but it's an extremely small amount of people. The people who are at the top of the hierarchy and the people that are all the way at, in terms of economics are and the people who are at the bottom are not always the same ones. And like you have this aspect of showing mercy to those people who are all the way at the bottom, like that rectifies the poorness of those people right now, and then like the whatever space they left in the poor section of society that will probably get filled by somebody else. But because it's a constant churning, like you've got the flood waters down there, like there's a lot of change going on. But you have the thing of like, you have an extremely poor person that sells themselves as a slave to somebody who's much richer. And then that richer person, assuming they're not a monster, winds up eventually adopting them as their own family member or something like that. Or even at least gives them stability and, protection and stuff like that. So you do have that thing of, well, it isn't necessary to completely institute this or solve the problem itself, because as long as you have a certain you have certain people that are actually making this effort, that are closer to the top of the hierarchy and are making and are demonstrating mercy, and maybe they don't even have to be hired like that high. They can just be even like one or two layers above. By kind of having that, you're still continually bringing people up from like out of the water, and like, yeah, you're always going to have people in the water, right? But they don't have to be the same ones.
Yeah. So, it just talks about these solutions are all attempts of subsuming time into space on the communal scale. And then he says, they all fail to acknowledge the legitimacy of time per se. Like, I don't know if I like the choice of words there, right? But I would use the word reality, right? Like time just has its reality, and like you can't deny the reality. Like I don't know if it's legitimate. Um,
Something that came to mind reading that was, that scene where like the disciples get condemned by the authorities because they were taking what was it, like wheat or something like that from the edges of the field on the Sabbath. And it was the whole thing of like, no, you're not supposed to be working the fields, but it's explicit in the law that you're supposed to leave the edges for the stranger and the needy and the poor. And it's like, well, here's the poor, and like they're at the edges of the field and they're not working it, and they're taking the part that is due to them in the law, and then they're being accused of working. And it's like, by doing that and overextending judgment or law or whatever to the margins all the way out there is delegitimizing like the zit zit of the fields. And so it's like you're over subsuming time into space. Like, you've completely woven in the fringes at that point. And then also to that point of like, now we're going to put you under penalty of law for doing the thing that the law literally says you're allowed to do.
yeah, and we were talking about the putting yourself in a what was it, argumentative, oppositional frame, right? And it's like, well, that's what you do, right? You just okay, you're on my land, so you have to obey the rules of the land, right? It's like, yes, but now you've created a situation where there's lack of fertility, right? Like there's the stranger or whatever, right? Like the things on the outside, they can't come in and bless you, right? Because they're in conflict, and now you're in opponent processing, right? And like you could have the negative interpretation that they're trying to protect the things that are theirs, right? But yeah, I don't know if I want to go there as far as that, but you are protecting the space that is there at least, right? And then the question is, well, like what are you protecting it from, right? What are you trying to achieve by having this order?
Yeah. And within the context of that story too, with the taking food from the edge of the field on the Sabbath, where it's like they were already identifying against before they saw them doing this, so it's just like they're within the limited context
Mm.
of their own perception that they were already framing everything in. They have boxed themselves in so much that even though they're in charge of the law, they're not even aware of the law that they're in charge of because they've limited their perspective that much.
Yeah, and that's also a thing I experienced today, where it was like, yeah, you're involving others in something you've already made up your mind in, right? And then it's like, what rules are there for the other people, right? Like, well, you can see it with the EU and Ukraine. It's like, well, like, how are we going to have peace talks with Russia when you already like made up your mind about what they need to do, right? like like how's there any anything good gonna come from that, right? Like, well, they can't. No movement can be had, right? Because the only way that things can move is that the identity that is assigned to the Russians in that case, right, is going to be adopted by the Russians, and they're never going to do that, right? So there's a and that's often right when you assign people identities, and they're not likely to cooperate with you. So yeah.
This is the thing too, like assuming intent from other people. Like I don't know if you've ever had this as like a kid, where you do something stupid and then somebody goes and says, "Why did you do this?" Like the real answer is, "I don't know," but then they say, "Well, that's not good enough. Like you had to have had a reason," because obviously we're all incredibly rational and logical all the time, even at like 7 years old or whatever. So then you go and start having like post hoc rationalization, and that's not what they had in mind. So they're like, "No, that's not why you did it," and it's like this is a stalemate. Like we're never getting out of here. I like this line here that he needed to acknowledge due to his pride and self righteousness. Which I think is a good contrast also with what we've been talking about to the fact that Daniel literally tells him to observe righteousness. So it's like it's not the same thing. Like there's a major difference between actual righteousness and like actual like taking actions in the world that are righteous, and then like the interior self-righteousness and self-justification.
Yeah, so when we go to the bottom, it says he raises the poor from the dust and the needy from the dunghill. So the dust is the multiplicity, right? The undistinguished, the incoherent. And then the dunghill, which is like really interesting symbol there. It's a hill, right? But it's kind of made of excrements, right? Which is things that were used for life and then discarded. um, and the needy, what are they're partaking of the the things that can't sustain them effectively, right? Or trying to.
We want to
Well, they're.
address that question there, Manuel, in the
Hmm?
chat.
Okay, I have the. Which one?
On at the bottom.
Maybe. Okay. Maybe you need someone who's still on the way, who's still making up their mind. How does Peterson and his fidgeting fit into this? Do you know the context of this, Mark, when it came up?
I didn't quite understand the context. I thought somebody else might be able to, I mean, it sounds like he's associating fidgeting with not making up your mind, right? With the thinking that I talk with my hands, talking is thinking, I think with my hands. That's what's happening there, right? I don't know who missed that, but I bet someone did. And so yeah, I mean, Peterson's fidgeting is very much his nervousness and anxiety around trying to work something out. It happens to a lot of people. So I mean, I don't know what the significance is with still being on their way. I don't like to presume people being on their way in the in that way, like, or making up their mind. Like, you're always making up your mind, you're always on your way. Who like, why is that different from Tuesday, right? Oh, I see. About outsiders getting involved in something you haven't made up your mind on. Yeah, I don't know, Manuel. You were the one that brought that up. So
yeah, so I think the outsiders getting involved, right? So it kind of also depends on what you made up your mind on means, right? Like I would argue that as things that are established is maybe a better way to think about it, right? So if you have established some saying it has a being, right? And so now that being is something worth protecting in and of itself. And so when outsiders come in and they want to partake, just take this book club, for example, and you're asking a question, right? Like you want to partake in the book club. Well, it's like you get to partake, right? But like we decide what question to take, how where to take the question, and that might not be satisfactory for you, right? But our purpose is not to satisfy you, right? Like we have a different purpose, right? And so we can fit your participation in that purpose, maybe, right? But then the partaking, right, like of you is like you're gonna have to adjust yourself, right? Like you're gonna have to fit in, and like we might make some room for you, right? But like the fitting in is necessary, right? Because if we have to change the identity of the book club in order to accommodate you, like we're no longer the book club, right? And like why would accommodating you supersede the purpose of the book club? Like that's ridiculous. Like that's putting things upside down, right? Um, so I'm not sure how to do connect this to the fidgeting, but like I think Peterson has big issues with dealing with things that are established, right? Because he always tries to justify them, right? So he doesn't rely on the self-evidence of the establishment, but he's relying on an external means of framing that brings out the fruit or brings out the goodness of the fruit, right? So like that makes you the ultimate judge of the world, right? Which makes you into a position that's unsustainable, right? And that would cause anxiety. So like that would bind it back to the fidgeting. Um,
I'd
so
like to
yeah,
take a crack at it. I'll let you go first.
thanks. Yeah, I think the bridging of the worlds. All right, he's not doing that. To Manuel's excellent point, he's more trying to redeem something I would refer to as objective material reality as a method of sense making. And I think one of the great misunderstandings about Peterson is that Peterson, it looks to people like what Peterson's doing is he's leading people to a place. Okay. That is actually not correct at all. That is not what's happening even a little bit. What's happening is people are following Peterson to a hallway. And there's several doors in that hallway, my friends, several doors. And the people who are going through the doors that you like, you go, aha, I see what Peterson's doing, right? But the people that are going through the doorways you don't like, that you don't see because they're not part of your reality or your perception, or maybe you don't have eyes to see that there, right? You're ignoring them because you can't see them. And fair enough. Like, yep, can't see it, you're going to ignore it. That's fair. But like, you're not actually seeing all the things that are happening. You're only looking at the positive case and saying, look at Peterson is bringing people into the church, and therefore people are following Peterson into the church. It's like, no, that's not the only thing that's happening, and that's not what he's doing. And so he's fidgeting because he's still in the middle of a bunch of things, not two things. And not that I think that, like, when Jonathan Pageau talked to him probably a year ago now about, being on two islands and being pulled apart, that is correct, right? I just don't think it's a sufficient way to look at what's happening, right? Because the stress that Peterson's under, while it is directly related to what he's doing, he doesn't understand what's happening around him because he's not even looking, right? And fair enough, maybe he shouldn't or doesn't need to. I'm not going to critique that here and now, maybe ever publicly. But there's a lot happening around him as the result of what he's doing. I think the best way to look at what he's doing is he's showing you the edge of materialism and giving you alternate explanations. Now, the fact that those explanations seem to lead people, out of a crisis of faith or out of a meaning crisis for a significant number of people doesn't mean that's the majority of the people, right? Oops, that already could be a problem, right? And it doesn't mean that it's a good thing, right? Because if you lead somebody out of a crisis of faith and into a cult, that's not great. That's not great, right? And so no one's judging that, right? No one's even looking at what I just outlined. No one's looking at Peterson's doing a lot of things to a lot of people, and it's not all the same things to his audience, right? And you don't really know how big his audience is or what the side effects are, right? Like, I don't know. I'm not claiming you don't know because I do know. I'm claiming we don't know, right? And no one's even looking at it. So to make the claim that anybody knows is a little sus to me. I'm a little suspicious on that. And so when you think of it in terms of that, the Peterson perspective is man on two islands that are spreading apart. Absolutely. I would say those two islands are not religion and secularity. I would say those two islands are moderate leftism and extreme leftism. And this is why people are talking about culture war and civil war. Yeah, it's a civil war if you're on the left. If you're on the right, you're doing what you've always been doing, right? You're still conserving. Everything's going normal. You're still feeding the morons who are persecuting a war against themselves effectively and wondering why they're so dumb, right? That's definitely the conservative attitude right now. I know many conservatives. It's pretty much what their attitude is, right? And so from the Peterson perspective, one thing is happening. From the audience of Peterson perspective, or the followers of Peterson, or followers plus naysayers, or however you want to frame it, lots of different things are happening. From the perspective of the people, we'll say, in any given church, like maybe the Orthodox Church, for example, lots of people are coming to the church. They all know Jordan Peterson. This is wonderful. Jordan Peterson brings people to orthodoxy, right? Ignoring that the Catholics are also seeing the same phenomena, by the way, right? And understanding it even less well for various very good, but perhaps bad for the universe reasons, right? And then all the people that are starting cults and joining cults as the result of this, right? And so you could just look out at any number of things. You could look out at the Verviki crew, right? That's all cult behavior, right? You could look at it at any number of other of these quote gurus that are coming up, and these are all cult-like behaviors. That's not good. That's all the result of Peterson, right? Peterson doesn't see any of this, is my suspicion. I mean, you might see some of it, but I don't think anyone's even looking at the results at this point. I think people are seeing results and making inferences about how they got there and whether or not they're good or bad, but they're not looking at the group and then looking at the results from the group, and that's a hard thing to do. So fair enough.
And
But,
also, it might not be a group, right? So you're getting into a whole lot of issues, right?
but
So
there's a
when
there's a
we go
group
back
of
to the
followers of Peterson. You can group the followers of Peterson as a group, and then find out how they split up on the other end.
okay, so if we go back to the graph, right? So it's space, ground, by time, right? Which is, to go back to the Nebuchadnezzar thing, right? That's a group, right, under a head. And we've been talking about all the orphans and all of the people that hang on, right? And so, like, what are the people that hang on, that feed themselves from the side of the fields? Well, those are people with an unestablished identity, right? They're not identified in relation to the hierarchy. So effectively, they're in limbo, right? So if we put that back onto Peterson, right? Like Peterson has a lot of people orbiting him, right? But they're in limbo, right? They haven't set roots anywhere. So like even if we were to judge, right? Like you can only judge things by like when they've actually been fulfilled, right? I was like, well, okay, like if you convert to a church, right? Like I would argue then you adopt a new identity, right? Like a lot of people actually get a new name. Um, so like that would be the ending of a chapter and the starting of a new chapter. Like marriage would be the same thing if you at least honor it properly, right? You're losing your life to find a new one. Um, so if we're talking about what effect Peterson has, right? Like we kind of want to hang our hats on that level, right? It's like, okay, like there's a bunch of people in limbo and like who actually get firmly planted, right? And then there's a whole lot of people where he's just like their leaves in the wind and he's just giving them a big blow. So it's like, okay, like now they're twirling and they're going to displays and like, yeah, like I don't know if you can get rooted in a cult, but you can definitely end in a cult. So like that's a way to be rooted in a box in the ground. Um,
So I want to kind of just bring this to the diagram again a little more. So you have like to pay attention to the arrows that are going downwards. So you have the participation is being informed from above, and so all of these things. Looking at the previous diagrams that have had the same sort of shape with the water at the bottom and the little question marks below and everything. You have the sort of thing of subsuming upwards. The identity is coming down, and then there's things that are supporting or not that are being kind of subsumed into that emanating identity. So within the case of this book club, for example, like you have the thing of, well, no one approaches unless they're chosen, right? As far as being picked for the for whose comment gets highlighted and whose questions get answered and that sort of thing. If you have something completely irrelevant, then you're just it's not even going to get picked up at all. And we've had that where like a bot will come in and it's just like, okay, we're just going to ignore this. But you have all of these different things that are within the bounds of the structure, like they're adhering. There's a certain level of kind of submitting and allowing themselves to be informed and assimilated into the thing. They give up something and then they wind up receiving that higher identity. And then you have these question marks under the water, and just kind of thinking that where it's like, well, if you're orbiting if you're orbiting somebody that is one of those little question marks, then it's like sometimes you come to the surface and sometimes you're below and sometimes you're on the side. And it's just like, well, that's not the same as refinement. Or being raised up. It's like you're just orbiting this thing and you just so happen to ride the wheel of time just enough to be able to like breach the surface and see, oh wait, I should grab this. And it's like that's a very different thing. And I think of, there's this thing of like that we've talked about with having words and laws and things like that as rectifications for a lack of spiritual mediation. And so, you have the realm that Peterson is in where you have, it's a bunch of conversations and it's a lot of writing and it's and it's like that stuff is useful, but that is it just kind of goes in circles to a certain extent. Like none of it is really in service of anything aside from just doing more conversations and doing more of these sorts of things, as far as I can tell. And then just thinking of the fidgeting, like I don't want to associate Jordan Peterson with Kane, but I can't get the trembling limbs away from the kind of lack of capability of latching onto something stable. So you have like I enjoyed the explorative talks that Peterson has done, but it's like you see him pacing around and moving his hands and everything. So it's like he's in exile on stage and everything, and it's like it's good. Like he wraps it all up. Like he gathers everything together, and like that's useful. But there is something to like you're just doing that, and if you don't eventually attach that somewhere, then it's like it is kind of like all work under the sun is vanity type of thing. So it's like, well, you're turning in circles, and it reminded me of the that thing of like as we in the footnote there, it actually I forgot that it mentions the zit of the fields thing. But you had that the story of the Samaritan woman that says even the dogs have the crumbs that fall from the table and everything, and there's different types of like identity that the dog could have. So the word that Jesus uses in that context is translated in Greek to something that's the equivalent of like doggy, like or like Fido or something like that. Like it's a familial sort of domestication type of term, not just like oh some mutt walks in and takes food or whatever. Like it's like no the family pet or something like that. So there
Well, the
is
faithful dog, right?
right
That's
exactly. Yeah, and it's just like okay, yeah, like they and you can see that thing where it's like it's a humbling, it's a to the connecting to the name of Lamech, where it's like well there's a certain power in humbling yourself. That was why I was also saying Matthew 18, like he literally says that the one who like humbles himself like a little child is like among the greatest type of thing. That it's like here's that enormous contrast of the faithfulness from the person that's all the way at the bottom there. So I think to our guy's question there about like the bridging between worlds and like sort of the connection of outsiders getting involved, that there is something about like if you set the example of actually becoming informed by that thing that you're pointing to and you're actually exemplifying that and leading people there, then that's one thing as opposed to just kind of pointing at that and then pointing at something else and pointing at a different thing tomorrow. There's like that's kind of where the difference lies for me, I think.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about people speaking in public as public therapy, right? So
Mm.
the easiest thing is like the news panels, right? It's like let me scream for 3 minutes, and then nobody understood anything any better. It's like, but and then you have these conversations, right, where people basically want to have express their story, right, and like be heard or be seen, right? And like Peterson is kind of like doing this therapy of like, oh, I can't set this right in my mind. Let me use you to get things straight for myself. which is, to be fair to him, which is like the most healthy form of them all, right? Because if you like find the proper patterns, then other people can adopt the proper patterns. But also like what are you doing, right? Like you're because effectively what you're doing is you're in public, right? So that means that you presume that you have something to give, right, to share, and you're lost because that's he's lost. So like, why are you sharing the thing that you're lost in? And I mean, like that's all of these people. They're just in their wanderings in the deserts. They find an oasis, right, and then they put off a coffee shop. Like,
I think we talked about this briefly yesterday, just the thing of like lifeguards, that you have the person that's flailing and panicking in the water and everything. And it's like, well, it's one thing, like you can be a strong swimmer and that person still drowns you because they're freaking out. And so, like, it at least used to be, it probably still is part of the lifeguard training that you have to punch them in the head to, like to get them to stop flailing around. And then they can actually start going in the same direction as you. It's like it's not enough to just okay, I go with this person and then now we're going together. It's like no, I have to completely stop whatever weird cycle of panic you're in. And then now you have to you either submit or get subdued, if you want to be brought back to shore.
so to put things back into the justice frame, right? So
Mm.
like I see that there's like a lot of people in a transitory space, right? Like they're in limbo, right? Like Peterson is in some sort in limbo, right? And what is he doing? Well, he's awaiting judgment, right? So either he will make it or he won't, right? And like he wants his judgment now, right? Like he wants to be in the finish line, and like he's not really giving proper respect for the fact that he still has to get to the finish line, right? Like there's a lack of humility in the way that he's carrying himself, right? Because like, well, uh, Russell Brand is a way better example in this, right? He's like, okay, I just converted, right? And like, now let me do all of my baby steps in front of a crowd. And it's like, no, like you're a baby, like grow up and then step in front of the crowd, right? So yeah, there's a misordering of things there
Mhm.
definitely, right? And it has to do with judgment, right? Like and being put in your place in the hierarchy.
Mhm.
And now I have judged that we are beyond our time. So yeah, any questions that you're still having, please put them in the chat, and we will handle them after our reflection. And yeah, so Nebuchadnezzar's dream, right? The tree. I think what are the trees that need to be cut down so that they can be grown back? And what like since we've been talking about Peterson and other people handling themselves, right? It's like how do we handle ourselves when we're in that state? So let's take that into reflection, and we'll see you in a minute. let's return to attention, awaken from our slumbers, and I hope our dreams have provided us with many fruits that this poor tree couldn't bear anymore. So yeah, who wants to cut the first piece? I'll just go ahead again because you guys are so enthusiastic. I like it. They're like, yes, me. Anyway, so there's a couple things that I identified, right? So the tree had to be cut down, so it can't grow back the same way. Like that's not an option, right? So, and so there's a lot of voices that need to be heard, right? And so things need to be spoken into so that they can be incorporated, right? Because they haven't been given a place, right? And then there's also like, what are the lights that light the path, right? So there's things that, well, you grow towards the light, right? So like, what are you growing towards? And then the other thing that stood out to me is like all the animals, the birds, right? They all lost their place, right? They lost their identity, right? So there's something with hosting things, right? So like when you have the tree, it hosts a bunch of things, and there's a relationship with them, right? And they need to be honored, right? And yeah, like there's a responsibility towards them, right? And the other way around, right? Like there's a dependence from their side to the tree, right? Because they don't have a place, and they don't have a name either. Right? So that's what I got.
Yeah, something that I was thinking is looking at this chapter. Just the last line, the excerpt from First Samuel. He says, "He raises the poor from the dust and the needy from the dunghill. He makes them sit with princes and inherit the throne of glory. For the pillars of the earth belong to the Lord." So you have, we talked a bit about like the self accusation and like not trying to cover things up. It's one thing, like you have the contrast between like the people who are doing the public therapy thing, which is like it's an excess of just taking all the private stuff and then throwing it out there, versus just like, okay, clearly there's a discrepancy. I'm not going to hide the fact that like if you got a cut and it got infected or something like that, it's not like, don't hide that. You should show that to the proper person, like show that to a doctor and have them take care of it. Or if you're a tree that has like a wilting branch or something like that, like this needs to get pruned now so it doesn't affect the rest of the tree. If you prune the branches early and often, or self-accuse, or just kind of have a sort of transparency there, it's less effort in the long term. Like there's no need, like with Jordan Peterson's the dead wood analogy, or just like burn it early and often. That way the heat doesn't become so much that you wind up getting completely consumed down to a stump. Essentially, you got to start over, because a lot of times it doesn't completely wipe you out. Maybe it will, but it's like, why run that risk? And to that point of, you wind up displacing it. Like your actions have consequences in the world, and there are things that depend on your stability. And so if there are, if the birds and the beasts of the field and stuff are relying on your shade and like your branches and stuff, then there's a sort of responsibility to them to stay upright, to tend the stuff that isn't working. Otherwise, everyone is going to be affected. And there's this line that Matthieu uses where he says, the Sabbath and ornamentation is often expressed as kindness to the remainders. And just to kind of associate that with not just kindness in terms of like being nice to them, but also kind as in like kin, like family, that the way that David, akins himself to a beast, or, the Samaritan woman akins herself to a dog, or something like that. Like the sort of thing of, okay, I'm going to take the lowest possible place and make myself kind of like them. And then not arrogate to myself the position of judgment, but kind of rather submit myself to pruning and outside judgment, so I'm not relying on my, personal perspective that's so limited. Because that's how you stay open to the miracles. Is that it's like, well, if I'm going to worry about, I think in the previous chapter, one before, there's something about like the natural consequences of things, and a lot of times because of supernatural help, which in the case of a child would also be maybe like just their parents or something like that. Because of supernatural help or circumstances or the cooperation of other people, a lot of times we're shielded from the natural consequences of something. And maybe not suffering those consequences sometimes doesn't give us proper context or contrast. But just being able to kind of, I don't know, just submit oneself to being informed by things that are emanating from above and are at least, like time tested and work. That sort of stuff. And that sort of example too of like, who are the people that are higher in the hierarchy that are demonstrating this being crowned by time thing. And if you can't emulate them, like submit to them and let them do their thing that they're doing for you. That way you don't stay, under that waterline.
Yeah, so I like this idea about kin, like, because like your kin advocates your interests as well, right? Because they know your interest.
Yeah.
Because who else knows your interest? So yeah, I think there's something there, right? Where like it's not empathy, right? Like it's in some sense partaking in the position in some manner, and thereby recognizing the needs, right? And that has nothing to do with your personal perspective necessarily.
Right.
Like that's important.
That reminds me of there's a saint that's getting canonized this year in August named Giorgio Frassati, and he died in like the early 1900s or something like that. But he would go and he would minister to the poor, and he died a young man, probably like 21 or 22, something like that. But he would, for like 4 or 5 years, he had a ministry to the poor where he was bringing them medication and food, and he came from a very rich family. In Italy there, but his family actually didn't know what he was up to. So like he would do all the stuff that the family said, and then he would just kind of like sneak off and tend to the poor in his off time. So when he died, unfortunately for an illness that set in like rapidly, that he at his funeral there were like hundreds of poor people showed up, and no one knew why. Like all of the city's poor showed up to his funeral, and his entire family had no idea who these people were and how they knew his son, their son.
Christopher, you have a closing statement?
I don't know. You were talking about kin in that relation to things, and that reminded me there's a story of Burn Power told about when he went to Tbilisi, Georgia there, and he was standing on the train platform. And he remembered that in New York, you wouldn't want to stand there because somebody might push you in. But then he looked around and saw that none of these people are going to push me in. And part of why that was like, oh, these people are all here like with their families. Theirs aren't, these are grounded people who, they have their family and their place in a hierarchy, whatever here. They're not the random crazy people and displaced people from New York. So.
Okay. Hello, grounded crazy people. See y'all next week.